the Air National Guard at a really critical time, and the Air National Guard provides some key capabilities to the National Defense Strategy, to the total Air Force, and also to the Joint Force. So thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So we'll turn it over to you first to kind of give us the lay of the land. Where is the Air National Guard at today? And what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities that you're feeling on a daily basis from your seat?
Okay. All right, Kate, let me just start, because you kind of hit on it. It all starts with the airmen. So a little over 108,000 airmen in the Air National Guard today. Those airmen are trained and ready as part of the United States Air Force. We are one of the three components between active guard and reserve of the United States Air Force. Trained in, we call ourselves the unit equipped go-to-war force. Okay? So the Air National Guard is ready built to fight and win our nation's wars. That's what we're there for. With that, we're largely 2/3, a little bit over, of a part-time force, okay? Drill status guardsmen. Now I say part-time, it means that they have another job. They're teachers, they're professors, they're in school, they're everything from airline pilots to they hold PhDs, and they're out there in industry. So they have another profession that they also bring those skill sets to us. You already alluded to it, but we're organized just like the United States Air Force in 90 wings, what we commonly refer to across the 54. That's 50 states, 3 territories, and the District of Columbia. When I talk about it, I talk about from Guam to Maine and from Alaska to Puerto Rico. And so that's kind of the Air National Guard in a nutshell. Now, having said that, I do want to kind of highlight, because you mentioned it, 1984, it was actually 39 years ago today that I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. Walked across the stage, shook President Reagan's hand, and became a member of this greatest Air Force in the world. And it's been a critical time, and I've seen just about everything in 39 years that you could possibly see. I started out in the Cold War, started out nuclear operations and nuclear weapons over in Europe and doing that, and that's kind of the first phase. As I left active duty, if you go back to the end of Gulf War I, we had the peace dividend, and we were at 525,000 active duty airmen. Okay? We went down to 395,000 in the span of about 3 years. So 130,000 active duty airmen. Right now we're sitting at 336 active duty airmen. Okay? So you look at the trend of the active duty and the downsizing the active duty. At the same time, the Guard was about 150,000. We're down to about 108,000. At that time, we modernized the Guard because of the force structure that we had at the end of that period. And I'm going to say it, at the end of the Gulf War, about 93 timeframe, we started in what I would call the Air Expeditionary Forces, which was rotations of our National Guard units into the rotational aspect of global force management. So mostly into CENTCOM, but also into others. Fast forward from that point, it was all about maintaining readiness, high readiness standards, and doing that stuff. And then the next phase was really 9/11. So 9/11 hits. We're not prepared for attack on our soil, and I'll say it that way. We had very few units on alert. We did have a couple in the Air National Guard. C2, also some fighter units. And from that point, we went to war in the Middle East. We were doing two things. We stood up what we have right now, which is 94% of the Homeland Defense mission in the National Guard. We became an operational force at that time, 24/7, 365 days a year, manning the Homeland Defense mission. And also, we were now in both the surge to wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then also in the rotational force of Iraq and Afghanistan. So those have been going on for 3 decades for the Air National Guard inside the United States Air Force. And then what I call, where are we today? So back in 2018, the National Defense Strategy came out, and 2022 doubled down on that National Defense Strategy that defined our pacing challenge as China. Secretary of the Air Force came in a couple years ago, said I have one goal, or I have 3 goals really. It's China, 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 which basically became one goal. And so now, as we pivot to that, where the Air National Guard is today, we are still an operational reserve. Okay. Matter of fact, as I looked across our 90 wings, 32 of them have a Title X employee in place mission today. So 1/3 of the force is always employed in some way, shape, or form. And so when you look at an operational reserve, that's part of that operational reserve. Okay? So we have members on mission today. Homeland Defense, the C2 Homeland Defense, the air refueling Homeland Defense, also the fighters, the find, fix, track, target, engage, assess of Homeland Defense and how we do that. We fit inside the United States Air Force in that. In addition to that, we're also in I'll call it the distributed network of global C2 and global intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So these employ-in-place missions where they actually were able to take the feeds from overseas, think of the MQ-9 caps and stuff like that we run. We're running those 24/7, both for SOCOM and for the geographic combatant commanders. So those are the type of things that the Air National Guard is each and every day. In addition to that, we're also in that global force management. So right now, when I looked at it this morning, I had about 8,400 guardsmen in some sort of Title 10 status, actively employed overseas, and that's CENTCOM, AFRICOM, EUCOM, SOUTHCOM, and INDOPACOM primarily, and also a lot in NORAD, NORTHCOM. And so when you look at the force and that, you look at what we're doing, again, for the Title 10 mission. Couple that with what we do in the homeland for our governors. And you look at what I would call where I've seen the Guard become the first military responders in the homeland. It wasn't always that way. This came about from years of dealing with hurricanes, wildfires, and that. And then what we really became was the most trusted uniform force in there. And we have done everything, especially COVID. You look at where COVID is and what we were on, the longest, largest mobilization of the Guard since World War II. You look at the things that we've done with election security. The nation trusts the Guard members to do those things. We've even driven school buses. So parents feel confident in their National Guard. And then what I have is about 77,000 to 80,000, because I covered all the rest, that are in a ready mode, trained and ready, again, to fight and win our nation's wars. So when I look at the Guard today, we are an operational force with strategic depth. The things that keep me up at night. And this is where I look at our force structure. My number one thing is recapitalization and modernization of the force. We are sitting on the legacy aircraft of the United States Air Force. And I'm talking A-10s, F-15Cs, pre-block F-16s, C-130Hs, KC-135s, that legacy. We need a concurrent and proportional recapitalization plan across all those platforms. And so when I go and I work inside the United States Air Force and the corporate process inside the United States Air Force, I'm always advocating for concurrent and proportional recapitalization. So the things that are in production today, F-35 and F-15EX, okay? In the future, CCAs and GAD. In the KC-135 example, KC-46, you know, and where does that next generation of a tanker come in on that? Because they have the trained and ready and experienced force in order to handle those transitions. And so when I look at our Guard, that's where we're sitting, but that's the kind of help that we need is a modernization and a roadmap in order to get after the national defense strategy. And we fit very well inside the United States Air Force. I've been very successful in order to get us into new missions and new mission areas. So it's not only the equipment piece, but it's also the mission piece. And even giving up some of the legacy missions like old C-130s and going into cyber-enabled air superiority. Brand new for the United States Air Force. Cyber Warfare Wing, focused on one of the primary functions of the United States Air Force, air superiority, and how we're going to deliver combat effects out of the 179th Wing in Mansfield, Ohio, to counter Russia, to counter China, to counter North Korea, Iran, and any other rogue nation that's out there.
So we're about a decade out from the National Commission on the future of the Air Force. So I'll touch on that and then also get a sense of where you think the Air Force is headed. But I think, you know, looking at the results of that, so that was in 2014, the Army followed up with a similar congressionally mandated commission. the result of that was A, finding some cost savings, but B, really and truly integrating the Guard and the Reserve in the total Air Force. And that meant integrating at the operator level and at the platform level. So how do you think, about a decade in, how is that going for the Air Force?
I think very well right now. If you look at where we are as a Guard in our United States Air Force, I'm in every mission area of the United States Air Force. Nuclear operations in the B-2. You know, the leading edge of our nuclear deterrent bomber strategy. And then all the way down to taking the lead in cyber for cyber-enabled air superiority. I just touched on that unit, but everywhere in between, the Guard is there. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that we are an integrated force to get after the national defense strategy. There are some other things that the National Commission on Structure of the Air Force touched on that I think that we're behind on, and I'll touch on those as an example, as some examples here. But I think for us, as far as where I see other services, we are more integrated today than any other service. It is seamless, and you talk to anybody that is led in combat, gone into combat, or even have done joint operations, joint exercise and operations. There is no difference between an active duty member, a guardsman, or reservist today. The same training standards, the same equipment, fully interoperable with the joint force, and I think that has done us well as a United States Air Force. Where we continue to diverge from the National Commission on Structure of the Air Force is really in the proportionality of the new weapon systems, and that's what we're going through right now. We provide about 40% of the tanker fleet, okay? 179 KC-46s, and where we're going to wind up right now is about 28 of them. Mm-hmm. So when you look at that proportionality, it's not quite in proportion, okay? And so those are the type of things that we need to get after, because when we have Guard units with their deep experience, and both in the operations and the maintenance, and also our ability to rapidly innovate, you know, the industry tie that we have, it allows us to get after the national defense strategy in a different way. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at the F-35s in Vermont, for example, what they did last year over in USAFE, okay, when we were trying to deter any further aggression from Russia, and what they were able to do with the interoperability with the Dutch, with the ability to do agile combat employment into a non-U.S. airfield with the F-35s, what they were able to do and leverage our state partnership program in order to do a rapid agile combat employment. You look at that innovation and those long-term relationships with the weapon system and the mission, you have a very, very capable force.
So looking ahead a bit,
oh, yeah.
Each of the services are thinking about where they end up in 2040. How is the Air National Guard thinking about their specific role and then also their role within the total force? How does it look different from today?
Difference of today would be the missions. The people look about the same. And I say that because if you look at the strength of the National Guard, it is somebody that has come either off active duty or somebody that we recruited in and we trained over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so average age, you know, like take a fighter pilot, because I've looked at that because we have a fighter pilot shortage right now. So the average age of a fighter pilot in the National Guard is about 13.8 years. Okay? Very experienced. Active duty, when you're looking at operational line units, 6.5 or so, so it's about double. Maintenance is even more experienced. So the people that are taking care of the weapon systems, the people that are taking care of the missions, spend a long time looking at those missions. So where will we be in 2040? Secretary of the Air Force came the other day and said, hey, I want to look at where we're going to be in 2050. Mm-hmm, like, okay, mm-hmm. So even 10 years. I think we have the same people, okay? Those people that are dedicated a long time to the United States Air Force, United States Air Force mission. They're going to look at this problem set over a period of time and make it a marathon on how I can best do national defense and national security. So that's the thing. We will obviously be in different equipment sets, right? I don't think I can fly 60-plus-year-old KC-135s into the 2030, 2040 timeframe. I would absolutely like to be in whatever is next. So the equipment will look different. The mission sets, when you think about where we're going, more is going into space, okay? More is going into cyber. Those mission sets are when you know, quantum computing, AI, all of those things. You have to have the back end in order to get on that problem set, and you have to be able to, what I call, stare at it and perfect it over a long period of time. So we will be in different mission areas, but we will be in lockstep with our United States Air Force. And I think that that's probably the key there, is staying in lockstep with the United States Air Force. And where the Air Force goes, the Guard will go. Sometimes we're in the lead, like cyber-enabled air superiority. Most of the time, we're a what I call a fast follower to even be a out-innovator, simply because I can bring in different skill sets from industry and allow us to out-innovate where it started. And that's how we found ourselves both in the KC-46 and the F-35.
And you've touched a bit on recruiting, affiliating individuals who are leaving active duty. We certainly hear a lot in the news right now about the recruiting challenges for the active force. How do you see that playing out in the Guard and the reserve component writ large?
Yeah, I start out with my recruiters, and I go this: recruiting has been hard since 1974. That's right. I mean, that's when the all-volunteer force came out, and so it's hard. We've had a combination of years that have actually been more difficult because COVID shut down schools,
right?
Right? And really shut down society and did some things where we didn't have recruiters out there. Then I tie that up with rolling out of a new medical system where all the medical records of anybody are out there for people to see and evaluate. And then a delay in rolling that out into the MEPS, you know, how we get there. And what I have found is that what used to take 30 to 40 days to get a recruit in now takes 90 days. Mm-hmm. So it's 3 times as long. I have found about the same number of recruits, okay? I mean, our recruiters are producing like you can't believe, somewhere between about 50 and on, even higher than 60 for a no-kidding good production recruiter, so more than 1 a week. But again, they're taking a long time to get there, okay? We also lack the ability to get in schools and influence the influencers during this last couple of years. So that has combined to have a deficit right now sitting somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000. So what I've done is we've done a lot of things inside our Air Force to make it a little more seamless to come from active duty to both the Guard and Reserve, so breaking down those barriers. That'll help, number 1. Number 2 is I'm trying to get more recruiters in the field and get them trained, because each new recruiter, bring in 30 to 60 new recruits, obviously get those numbers back up there. And then the final thing, which is all up to the unit, and it's really all up to leadership in the unit, is retention. Right now I have some units that it's better than 98% retention. I mean, you know, they're losing less than 2%. That's normal. Yeah. I mean, that is amazing. So once I get them in, they see what the Guard's all about. They like what we offer. They like the different, I call it the different statuses and the ability to go out and do things. And so they like us, and they want to stick with us, but I got to get them in the door. So it's been challenging.
Yeah, and the Guard has a bit of an advantage in that there's some stability in location. Some of the challenges that we see in the active component don't necessarily meld over there. So national defense strategy, the buzzword around town, right, is integrated deterrence. And that, at its core, is an approach that uses every arm of not just the military, but other segments of society. Where does the Guard fit into integrated deterrence, and what advantages do you provide?
Okay. Yeah, the national defense strategy is, and I call it this way, it's more than just a buzzword to us, because I've gone out deliberately to all the wings, and I've said, hey, we need to operationalize the national defense strategy. We need to look at it holistically from what does it mean to do homeland defense, defend the homeland, right? As the nation's really first military responders. We're going to defend the homeland. And we need to defend the homeland because it's no longer a sanctuary in all domains. So from space to subsurface. For us in the Air National Guard, it's air, right, primarily, and some space, because I still have the space capability in the Air National Guard. So between the air and space, how can we do that? So that is the number one goal. There's the first thing. The second one, obviously, is deter strategic attack, okay, and also deter regional conflict and then dominate. So how do I get after integrated deterrence in also building the strong joint force? Very simply, readiness of the operation. I have to be ready today. I have to be ready today to defend the homeland. I have to be ready today so when the phone rings that I have to be able to answer nation's call. So it's about individual readiness, and then it's about collective unit readiness. Then, how does the Air National Guard fit in? Everything that we do that builds readiness is a signal to our adversaries or those that want to challenge us that today's not the day. So that's everything from a large-scale readiness exercise at a local, guard unit on a drill weekend or during annual training, to some of the exercises that we run in the homeland, the Northern Strike, the Northern Lightnings, Southern Strike, Century Savannah, Century Aloha's. Those where I put guard formations together and also bring in other joint force formations, and we do large-scale readiness exercise and our international partners. And then the third thing is large-scale readiness exercises in what I call the summertime series, whether that is this year Air Defender, where we'll do a large-scale mobilization and readiness, transatlantic readiness exercise over to Germany, where Germany is allowing us access to 4 of their bases. They've essentially given us four of their bases to operate out of. Or in July, going with Mobility Guardian out into the Indo-Pacific, and how we're going to do the mobilizations out of the Indo-Pacific. And then the final piece for the Air National Guard, which is unique to the National Guard, is a state partnership program. Right. 88 countries, 88 partnerships, over 100 countries. That state partnership program allows us to have long-term access to military engagements, military to civilian engagements, and even civilian to civilian engagements. And this is blessed off by the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, the state itself, the governor, the state legislature who signs up for that, and then a country. Okay? And we've heard a lot about the state partnership program between Ukraine and California, and why nobody in the current war with Russia has air superiority because of everything that California did. But there's also been some other great examples, even in my own time as a member of the Colorado Air National Guard, and then as the Adjutant General of Colorado, with Slovenia, who still credits the Colorado National Guard with bringing them up to NATO standards and getting them into NATO, to the Jordanians. That was our other state partnership. And in Jordan, they flew F-16s with us. I've been in the backseat of a Jordanian F-16 doing training in Jordan. I've also had their forces come over and participate in Northern Lightning as crew members in helicopters, because they all went through Fort Rucker, not as observers, but as actual crew members. Okay? And so when you can fly together as a paired crew, you build a strong bond. With Slovenia, they went with us over in the war. Jordan has gone to war with us also. They're still on missions over in CENTCOM and doing that stuff, but they've also come back and participated in Libya. And when they did that, we sent National Guard liaison officers from Colorado to make sure that they got in the ATO, they knew the mission, and they could be in with NATO, because they hadn't, that was their first NATO engagement. So those type of long-term relationships in the state partnership program creates that integrated deterrence around the world.
And is unique to the Guard.
It is unique to the Guard.
And lives there. I'll remind our audience members online that in just a couple minutes we'll open for questions. So for those of you in the audience here and then also online, we'll have you submit your questions through the portal. So thinking about the changes necessary to get us to 2040 or now to 2050, resources are always a part of the conversation, both for modernization and procurement. So it raises questions also about current force structure. So can you talk to us through what the Air National Guard is considering right now?
Sure. I think the biggest thing is is a modernization program, and I kind of hit on it, getting out of the legacy platforms and legacy missions. Okay, so both of those. All of that takes resources. Mm-hmm. And so when we go there, and what I say to all the adjutant generals and wings and everything else, we have to tell our story. Okay? And then the Department of Defense will decide the best manner in which to build the strongest Air Force. We believe we are part of that strongest Air Force, and we believe we're a big part of that. And we also believe that for value, when you think about it, when you have a largely part-time force, the military personnel costs are much lower. Okay? They just are. And also the longevity of mission and being able to only go through training one time and then get continuation and top-off training makes the rotations less. So the ability to stay on mission a long time, the ability to be part of the community, okay, which unique to the Guard, being part of that community allows you a lot of state resources, okay, and to include even military construction dollars where the state will fund those military construction projects and do that stuff. And then taking care of that equipment, and because of our experience, using it at a less rate brings you a value like no other. Okay? And so when I look across the Guard and I look across the dollars, the United States Air Force, we need resources because we're doing a couple things. We're recapitalizing 2 legs of nuclear triad. Very expensive. Okay? Absolutely necessary. We're also recapitalizing a legacy force. And that's fighters, airlifters, tankers, all of that, recapitalizing legacy force. Those take a lot of dollars. We're also getting after the operational imperatives that the Secretary has laid out. You know, everything from next generation of air dominance family systems, the B-21 family systems, but that goes into nuclear recap. Air battle management, you know, how do we close kill chains over long distances? How do we sense? How do we do a better job of doing that? A space order battle. Hey, how do we go out there and do these things? Those take a lot of R&D dollars, as well as then testing, evaluation, and then more acquisition dollars. So what we need to do is we just need to explain that to the American people. And we need to explain also from an Air Force perspective why the Air Force needs the recapitalization and modernization. From an Air National Guard perspective, we also need to explain to the American people what the National Guard means, and more importantly what the Air National Guard means, at least from my seat, in both national defense and national security. Those two things that we can bring to the table as a value proposition to the United States Air Force and the American people.
And another advantage that the Guard has is that you are members of the community in which you're serving, and right. So there's more opportunity for those exchanges at the interpersonal level. So you hit on some of the domestic responsibilities of the Guard in the previous years. Just last year, it spanned from Alaska doing typhoon response to Puerto Rico doing hurricane response. Can you speak to how those dueling requirements for the National Guard, how that plays out, and also how it affects things like training timelines and the demand on the force?
Sure. I think the biggest thing that we've done, both as an Air Force and as we look to the future, we're coming up with the Afrigen model, okay, which allows a lot of predictability. Now we've had that going in the past, but we have violated a lot of the principles that were originally set out in that. In Afrigen, we're trying to stay what I would call in bin to make sure that stays there. And we're on a normal readiness cycle, and all units are on that normal readiness cycle. So you have a window, period of availability. Okay? Outside that period of availability for National Guard, if you're not being utilized in the federal side, you can be called up by the governor at any time. So when we recruit people and we bring them in and we train them, we make sure that they understand that. And so part of it is expectation management. And then also part of it is making sure that they're trained to do that task. And if they're not trained to do that task, how long it can take to train them to do the task. Because we've had some things, January 6 riots. Okay? We moved a division into D.C. in less than 96 hours by air. Okay? Into Andrews, which at the time when we called how many aircraft can we have on the ground At any one time, they said 1. We said, that's not going to work. We rapidly called out our contingency response forces, built that up, got to 4 very quickly, and were able to move a division. That was a no-notice, large-scale readiness exercise. I mean, and if we had to do that in CENTCOM, we would have had probably a 6-month to a year timeline to move a division and all that other stuff, and we're doing it in a matter of days. So every Guard member understands that. They understand that, hey, when the nation has its worst day, we know we're going to work, and we just know. And so having that innate sense in ourselves and living by the motto of always ready, always there means that, yes, you're there for America whenever America calls you. Balancing, and this gets done at the unit level, I mean, really at the squadron level and sometimes below the squadron level. Balancing the readiness levels of the federal side to the readiness levels of the domestic side work hand in hand. Most of the things that we do have some sort of tie to the military readiness. Some things, though, we're burning that readiness, and we actually then sometimes pull them off of the domestic mission to go back and get into a federal readiness standard. Okay, so all those play hand in hand. It happens down at the unit level, and what I tell the combatant commanders is when they walk out the door from their unit, they will be up to standard, period, doc. And all the units understand that, and they balance those needs of what is needed both domestically as well as what is needed overseas. And we do that even sometimes with 2 federal missions like Homeland Defense for NORAD and NORTHCOM, as well as simultaneously doing, you know, a squadron rotation in CENTCOM. So we're good at doing that.
Yeah. So thinking back to, you know, integrating across the total force and the role of the Guard, when I was previously at the RAND Corporation, worked on a big study that was looking at what are the critical capabilities that are offered by the Guard and Reserve component that are tapped into over and over by the active component. So we looked at over 3.5 million man days of service, and we looked at what the skills were. So RPA pilots, that was big in the Guard, intelligence operators, fighter pilots, mobility pilots, maintainers. But one of the challenges that we identified was being able to tap into that resource sometimes was hindered by pay systems, personnel management systems, broader colors of money in the budget, the ability to tap into that resource when you actually need to use it strategically and over sustained operations. So are there any improvements on just the process and people management side that would be useful for you all to actually execute on those critical skill sets that live in the reserve?
There are. I would say that right now there's we've gone through what I would call an education period inside our United States Air Force. And it's an advocacy and education period, okay, that if you get it right for the Guard and Reserve, it will be right for the active duty. Okay. Now, we didn't necessarily lead this effort, okay. The Army National Guard brought in Integrated Pay and Personnel System, Army, okay, IPS Army. Matter of fact, they rolled it out to the Guard first. They said, if the Guard can figure it out and make it work, then we'll roll it out to active duty. It actually survived contact with the Guard, was rolled out nice, and then when it got scaled up, it actually crashed. Okay, now they're going back to fix it. Yep, lived through that. So now they're going back to go do this stuff. When you look at the Air Force Integrated Pay and Personnel System, same sort of thing happened. What we've had in the past was we built it for an active component, and also we built it for the administration, not necessarily for the user.
Right.
Okay. And right now we're dealing with my everything, and I call it that, but you know, my person, some of those things, they weren't built for the Guard. And so Chief Staff of the Air Force, the headquarters Air Force staff goes, listen, let's do a couple things. So there's some guiding principles that are coming out. One is, let's build it for the reserve component, because if we build it for the reserve component, do that. Second thing is, let's put it in the hands of the user, not in the hands of the administrator, okay? And then also the realization of, let's make sure that the chain of command, and I say that the leaders, both officer and enlisted, understand it and can use it, and then we'll roll it out to the larger audience. And so those principles, as we build these new programs out, are in there. When you look at new capabilities, Cyber Naval Air Superior is one, CCA is another one, NGAD. When you look at integrated by design, the Guard and Reserve is in there from the beginning. So that as we go to organize, train, and equip these new forces, we will be able to kind of bring in the best of all and make them a much stronger weapon system and a much stronger Air Force long term. Yeah. So we're making some good shifts.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to open it up to those of you who are in the room for questions. Michael? Got a microphone coming your way.
Hi, thank you. Michael Gordon, Wall Street Journal. Sir, I'd like to ask you a two-part question. First, you mentioned the state partnership program in the context of the NDS. Obviously, it is useful in terms of the role California played with Ukraine. Could you please address what's the state partnership program doing in the Pacific? What's it planning to do in the Pacific? What more could it do there, given the emphasis on the pacing threat? And secondly, I think we have to ask you, I know you can't comment on the Teixeira case and the leaks and all that, and don't bear personal responsibility for that, but it must cause you to reflect on how you need to change, adjust, reform, or not, your organization. What are you doing as a result of this case to take that into account and prevent that sort of thing from happening in the future?
Okay. Two great questions. Let me take the first one. Indo-Pacific and State Partnership Program. For the Indo-Pacific, I think right now there are 8 countries that we actually have active partnerships with in the Indo-Pacific. And so what we try to do is we listen to the country. What is it you would like to work on? What is it you would like to work on for your military? What is it you would like to work on to build up even the civil society because of what we do as the military's first responder? So some exercises this year, Washington and Oregon Guard have paired up to go bring F-15s down into Thailand and to work with the Thai Air Force and do that stuff. Why there? Because of overflight rights in Vietnam. Okay, so one is partnered with Thailand, one is partnered with Vietnam. And so we'll be doing exercises like that where we actually exercise access, basing, overflight, and full interoperability with our platforms, their platforms, and we will leverage those state partnerships to actually leverage the military to military side. Another one is exercises like we do in the Philippines. And I have some native Tagalog speakers, and I took 2 MQ-9s into the Philippines recently for exercise Balkatan. But I brought 2 of my pilots that are native Tagalog and 1 intel officer. And they were able to share actually with the Philippines, hey, here's what it means to fly an MQ-9 in their native language with their FAA equivalent. So to get that overflight of MQ-9s, which is obviously a big deal in a lot of countries. Okay, there's some countries that still don't allow it. So our ability to go do that in the Pacific will continue. And we send out those key leader engagements. We have a planning team from the states that actually puts together a yearly plan on everything that the country wants to do and how the country wants to become more interoperable with our United States Air Force. So that's kind of what we're doing in the Pacific. As far as the unauthorized disclosure, yes, the FBI investigation is still ongoing. So I'm not going to comment on any of that stuff. What we have done, we have done the stand down in all of our units. Okay? And I mean, it is every single unit where we've done a stand down. We've gone through all of our procedures. We've gone through our checklists on everything that we can do. And now what we're doing is we're looking at the recommendations out of the IG investigation, and also we'll look at all the data that comes out of the FBI investigation, and then go out there and make sure that it never happens again, as best we can. We have to remember, insider threat that had access, and those two things together are very, very difficult, as we've seen with Snowden and others, to counteract. But we will do our best to shut all that stuff down.
A question about cyber talent.
Sure.
So one of the benefits that the Guard has over the active force is that you have individuals who are, their full-time job might be in the cutting cutting-edge cyber world. How are you appealing to the cyber talent in the country? And then also, how are you capitalizing on or managing that talent?
Sure. I looked at the numbers the other day because somebody asked me how much we're invested in cyber, and out of 108,000, it was 11,000. So there's a lot of talent there. And we do everything from offensive cyber operations, defensive cyber operations, to cyber protection teams. Okay? And then, of course, we also do engineering and installations. So you think about the people that pull the wires. Combat communications, think about the people that deploy out and set up remote sites, remote SCIFs anywhere in the world. So a lot of that, the E&I portion that I just mentioned in the combat comp, a lot of those capabilities reside in the Guard. They're also first movers. So when you think about agile combat employment and how we're going to do that in the future, they're going to be one of the first that go out and set up these remote sites, okay, and allow us to deliver air power under agile combat employment scenarios. So that's the first step when I look at it. About the 11,000, they do everything from, you know, setting up the routers and doing that stuff all the way up to the high-end offensive cyber. How we capitalize on it, we give them what I will call mission focus that they don't have in the civilian community. And we're able to retain that talent and then also allow them to serve, and I call it their way, right? If you want to go out and go serve in the civilian community because you're making a lot more money or it's a different lifestyle and you want to go explore that, then please do and associate with us as Drill Status Guardsmen. We'll keep your skill sets up in the military, and all those skill sets actually transfer. And if you go out and get new skill sets in the civilian side, we'll add those to your record here on the military side. So that, as you said, like you did in your RAND study, hey, when I need a cyber operator that does this, this, and this, we can go look and go, yep, with the right personnel system, we can go look in there and go, hey, we have 20 or 30 of those. The other day, we were looking at doing a rapid expansion test team for ABMS, and they came to us with some very specific requirements, and I was able to source 39 individuals that had specialties not found in the United States Air Force. But these are, you know, developmental test engineers. And so that's how I would get them in the cyber realm, give them the training, give them the skill set, and then also allow them to go out and do other things in the civilian community.
Yeah, and that gets to a trend that we see in the active component as well on talent management, moving from kind of industrial age managing of our human capital to actually being able to identify those. Are there efforts underway to track and across not just cyber but other AFSCs as well?
Yes. Matter of fact, all of them. And I say that if we get the right personnel system in place, the individual member can put any of those qualifications that they had into the system of record, and then we can access the data. And it's all about the data that goes into the individual's record. And so, you know, I mentioned the Philippines. I didn't know I had 2 pilots that were Tagalog speakers. Okay, now I do, right? But I probably couldn't have pulled that out of the record without taking a long time.
Yeah.
So what we need is that personnel system that allows me to put those skill sets in there and know what that is. Somebody on the outside that's like an air traffic controller, but on the inside they're working the duty desk or the SARB, right? Having that transferability will help us out in the future.
We have an audience question here. So with the 173rd Fighter Wing of the Oregon National Guard selected for F-35 training, what is the plan for F-15EX training? Is there anything underway on that front?
No. So what we've done with the F-15E and F-15EX, we got them on a common OFP, Operational Flight Program, I guess. Yeah, sorry. Acronyms in the Air Force. You know how that goes. I know what it is. I just don't know what the acronym stands for. But we've put that under a common profile. Because of that, we're able to actually train at Seymour Johnson. And so the plan would be to do all the training at Seymour Johnson.
In the audience here, Rachel?
Rachel.
Hello again. Rachel Cowan with Military Times. So to dig in a little bit more on the sheriff piece.
Sure.
Again, I know you can't comment on it, but you know, it's raised concerns that his superiors knew that he was poking around things that he shouldn't have been, said, hey, knock it off, you know, but there was no real reprimand or no real address those failures of the chain of command and prevent them from happening again, specifically with, in regards to people overseeing people that they know, or they suspect, kind of how play is going on. And also you mentioned that you're acting on the IG recommendations. Can you talk more about what the recommendations are?
We're acting on the IG recommendations when the full report comes out and the people that are in that chain of command are briefed. That has not occurred yet. Okay, so no, it's not done yet. That is still ongoing. As far, and I'm going to say it this way, because when we went out there, and I call it the stand down and the retraining, follow the regulations and laws that are out there. Follow them, period. Because if that had occurred, maybe a different outcome. I don't think so, but again, I'll wait for the full report to come out. Okay, I still think this was a lone wolf, and I still think the leak was going to occur, unfortunately. In the future, we need to tighten down all of those processes, and part of those processes is what's come out from the FBI side. And when I read what's come out from the FBI side, it has me very, very concerned, as you can imagine. And so what we're doing is I'm waiting until the IG report comes out. We'll dig into that. We'll give it to the leadership, and the right steps will occur. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. You talked about how the Air National Guard retains its space component and is investing heavily in space and cyber. And so I was wondering, as the Space Force has been set up, what effects has that had on interoperability and division of labor? And is it the same as before the new service was established, or has it changed at all since?
Actually, we just expanded in our space capability. We just stood up 2 new squadrons. So we're getting after that. So we're up to 16 squadrons right now of space capability, and these are space operators. What the Air Force has said is that, hey, we are no longer going to retain space capability. So those Air Force specialty codes will go away because they're now in space. So that's where we're at. I'm going to manage the 2 services, okay, until such time that they tell me not to manage the 2 services. And so essentially what I've done is I've carved out a space, and I say current headspace and everything else, a space division, if you will, okay? And it's a director of space operations, deputy director, and a small staff that manages the entire space portfolio. And that's underneath the National Guard Bureau. So, yeah. So we're going to continue to maintain the readiness, the standards, all that other stuff, get them into schools and do that. What's happening, though, is the service diverges more and more away from the Air Force. That we'll get to a point where we got to make a decision on what we do with them. And so we're not quite there yet. We'll see if right now there's a couple of bills in Congress. And so this goes back to, 5th grade civics. It's great. You have an executive branch that says one thing, and you have a legislative branch that says another, and we'll see what the results are of that. You bet.
We'll wrap up with one more audience question. So you touched on the agile combat employments. What is the Guard doing to get up to speed on training for that?
We've actually led some training. We've gone and done agile combat employment to Thule, Greenland. We've gone to, we were the first in the F-35 to go to a non-U.S. base with 6 F-35s and deliver air power over a week long with 53 airmen. That includes pilots. So everything from security to doing full combat loads. So the agile combat employment side of it is units are taking on the local exercise piece. They're exercising it. We're taking the Air Force to places that they've never seen air power. I mean, places like Scotts Bluff, Nebraska. Also working with our other partners, AFSOC, AMC, ACC, going out to, turn A-10s, turn C-130s on highways and dirt strips out in the West. So we've been doing all of that. At the unit level, we're putting together those small packages, okay, in order to say what is the minimum amount of requirements I need to do the sustainment from the C2 side, from the command and control. How do I get my mission materials? What loads am I going to go out with? How am I going to be able to launch air power from this remote location? all the way to optimizing a C-130 load of fuel, weapons and ordnance, and any sort of spare parts. So we've gone through there. Even on the innovation side, using INGRIA funds to fund things like emergency use ladders for F-22s. So you can actually get out of an F-22. And so some of those things have been going on for a couple years now.
That's great. Well, I think that leaves us on a high note.
Okay.
So we really appreciate you taking the time today to give us a lay of the land of where the Air National Guard is right now and what some of the priorities are for you coming down the pike. So everyone, we thank you for your time, and we thank our online audience as well.
Thank you.